Now I would like to present our speaker, Crees. He is with Montana Audubon, and he will tell you a little bit more about himself and then talk to us about black swifts.
Great to see everybody here. I see some familiar faces. My name is Crees. I work for Montana Audubon and for the Montana Natural Heritage Program. And some of you may know me from eBird, or the past couple of years I wasn't able to get to the Jewel Basin, but before that I tried to get up there and help out, and I had to do that a couple of times, and probably met some of you there. But for the past, so working for Montana Audubon and the Montana Natural Heritage Program, during the summer I do a lot of bird surveys, including black swifts that we're going to talk about. Been doing that for about 5 years now. And then I also do point count surveys and river surveys in Missouri, where we do both point counts and black-billed cuckoo surveys, and ranching conservation surveys, and different types of fun field work in the summer. And then in the winter, for the heritage program, I do a lot of data processing. It's a little less exciting, but also fun in its own way. And this is my 5th year doing black swift surveys in the park. And so I want to tell you a little bit about black swifts, because it's a really, really cool and unique bird. And then I'll tell you about our summer surveys and show you a lot of pretty pictures of waterfalls that hopefully you enjoy. And so this is a black swift. Unfortunately, black swifts in Montana are hard to photograph because waterfalls are generally really big, and these swifts are active in hours when they're hard to see, late at night and early in the morning. So we don't get a lot of swift photos in Montana. So I wanted to start with a nice swift photo. This is in Shadow Falls in Idaho, north of Kellogg, Idaho. Great place to see swifts up close, but it's a little hard to get to. It's not a good road. And so a little bit about the life history of black swifts. Black swifts are really, really unique birds, and very, very different than other swifts and other songbirds. Well, they're not songbirds, but they have a lot of very unique things about them. So first of all, they're highly aerial. They spend much of their lives on the wing. One bird that was tagged in Colorado they found out it was flying for 10 months straight without ever touching the earth. And it seems like black swifts just prefer to do that. They prefer to fly. The only reason they have to touch the earth is because they have to make a nest and have babies. But generally, they're just on the wing almost their entire lives. Foraging, sleeping, everything is on the wing. Black swifts are the largest swifts we have in North America. Their wingspan is about 17, 18 inches. And in Montana, they nest exclusively on cliffs near waterfalls and seeps, always associated with water. Their nesting begins late in the summer, when most birds finish their nesting period. That's when they start, towards late June and into July. And they wrap up their breeding season usually towards the end of August, and sometimes into September. And they only have one chick per year, and the young take about 51 days to fledge after they hatch, which is incredible for a bird that weighs less than 2 ounces. So they're almost half the size of a robin weight-wise. And robins take about 14, 15 days to fledge. Red-tailed hawks take about 42, 44 days to fledge. And black swifts, 50, 51 days. So they take a very long time to fledge. One of the reasons is because they nest in areas where they don't really have to worry about predators too much. So they can invest more in the young. And after hatching and brooding, adults rarely tend or feed the young during the day, which makes it kind of hard to survey for them. And they forage all day long, and then at night they fly into the nest and feed the young, and then they leave early in the morning, early in the morning. And so we can't monitor them very conveniently. We have to go to kind of remote places and be there in weird hours of the day, and makes it challenging, but usually it's really, really beautiful places, as you'll see. They have strong nest site fidelity. Adults return to the same nest every year, usually. They're long distance migrants and spend most of they spend the northern winter in the Amazon, as far as we know. Most of them do. Some of them might be elsewhere. We don't know too much about that. So, why do we care about black swifts? We've been doing black swift surveys regularly since 2012, and we care about black swifts because it's a bird that's very vulnerable. They're listed as a species of concern and species of greatest inventory need in Montana. A lot of it is because they're considered at high risk due to the extremely limited breeding range. Now, if you look at a map, you may see a pretty big breeding range, but within that breeding range, the nesting habitat that they require is very, very small. Obviously, there's only so many waterfalls in the landscape. And they have a small population size, and they're very, very vulnerable to the effects of climate change, mostly the melting of the glaciers and snowfields, which feed the waterfalls that they need in order to nest. They're ranked as the North American land bird with the highest potential sensitivity to climate change. And also we should care about black swifts because they're objectively awesome. Just a little bit of chronology in Montana. Black swifts were not known until some people suspected they might be around in Montana. But in 1924, Rademeyer saw the first confirmed black swift by Libby. In 1961, Hunter and Baldwin found the first nest at Mission Falls. In 1962, they found a second nesting colony at Mount Vaught. And then there was a 42-year gap where no nests were found in the state until 2004, when Dan Casey found a colony at Haystack Falls. And some of you may be familiar with that. It's one of the best places in Montana to see black swifts, because you can see them right from the road. And then in 2011, after another 6-7 year gap, another nest was found in Gap Creek Falls in the Bitterroots. And then in 2012, we started meeting Montana Audubon and Glacier National Park and Fish Wildlife started a more regular, widespread survey effort with standardized protocols and evening surveys when we went to the nesting to the waterfalls at night and when you're more likely to see them. And around that time in 2012, we really had quite the explosion of nesting colonies in Montana. And every year after that, we generally find more and more, and because we know how to do it better. And then in 2018, we started doing paired surveys because there was some suspicion that you would see more swifts in the morning, early in the morning when they leave the nest compared to the evening when they come back to the nest. And sure enough, we found out that that's the case, and we see usually 2 to 2.5 times more black swifts at a given waterfall in the morning compared to the evening. Now we know of more than 60 black swift colonies in Montana, and some of these colonies are a single nest, so it's not like there's many nests that are colony, but we'll call them colonies. And most of those 60 plus colonies are in the Glacier National Park. So this year we did something a little bit different. Instead of going back to some of the same waterfalls that we've been surveying over the years in kind of a periodic way, every 2 or 3 years we return to the same waterfall. And with the help of Bird Conservancy of the Rockies and we followed their protocol that they've used in Colorado for some time, which is very, very similar to the protocol that we've been following, with a few differences. But we basically wanted to randomly select waterfalls in Montana instead of going to the ones we know are occupied. And so we ranked about 250 waterfalls, and then we took the top 40. We had to cut a bunch of them from the list and replace them, because if we had, for example, if number one on the list was one at the backside of Mount Kitla, and it was 2.5-day hike to get there, and there's no adjacent waterfalls, nothing in the area, it's just not worth our efforts. We had to get a minimum of 30 waterfalls in order to be able to do the statistical analysis. So we kind of had to find waterfalls that are close to other high-ranking waterfalls. We ended up eliminating about 15 of them and replacing them with the next highest ones that we could sample. And then another difference about this past season is that we had to do 2 surveys of each waterfall that we surveyed. And if we saw swifts at the first or the second survey, we did a 3rd survey, which made planning really tricky because, as you probably know, if you're working in a park, you have to have reservations for backcountry campsites. And if you're not sure whether you're going to be at a given place for 2 surveys or 3 surveys, it makes their planning and logistics pretty tricky. And so I had to do these kind of things, these little flow charts, where it's kind of, if we do see swifts, we stay another night. If we don't, we move to the next waterfall. And so depending on whether there's swifts or not, you could finish your big trip to the backcountry on Thursday morning or possibly Saturday morning. So it made planning tricky, and we have to plan and have a bunch of contingencies, but everything worked out great, and Lisa Bates always gives us a huge amount of support and help, so everything was fine. And a little bit about survey basics. And so you have to hike from your camp or from the road to the waterfall to the survey site, find an OP, an observation point with good falls and sky view. You don't want to look just at the waterfall, and you don't want to look just at the sky. You need about half and half. And that's because most of these surveys take place in really, really low light or sometimes complete darkness. And you can't see a blackbird that flies at 90 miles an hour towards its nest against a wet wall that's black. It's just really, really hard to see them. So early on, we usually try to see them against the sky. And even if it's dark outside, you can see movement against the sky. It makes it hard to see exactly where they go in the waterfall, which is another goal of ours, is to find the actual nests. But that's hard in other ways in the park, because some of the waterfalls are 1,300 feet tall. So good luck finding nests when they're that above you. And when you do morning surveys, you start about a half an hour before sunrise, and you continue to an hour after sunrise. And then evening surveys are an hour before sunset to about a half an hour after sunset. And really, when it gets dark, that's when you start seeing the swifts. You rarely see them when there's good light outside. And then we record all sorts of things, but of course, activity time, when we see the birds, what are they doing, and where are they using a waterfall, which part, up or down. And then we always record the high count, and the high count is the highest number of swifts that we see simultaneously at one time. You don't want to overestimate how many birds are using the waterfall, and so a lot of times you might have a pair flying in and out this spot, a pair flying in and out of this spot, and another pair right here. But we generally just record the highest number that we see at one time. And then we also have to score the waterfall. We kind of grade the waterfall so that we can learn what the swifts are queuing into. And then it also may help us in the future to select waterfalls, because anyone can score a waterfall without actually doing a survey. And then I'll talk about that some more right now. So yeah, like I mentioned, there's a lot of detectability issue with swifts, and imagine trying to see really well a black bird that's flying against this kind of a surface. It's really, really hard. And a lot of times these waterfalls are extremely remote, and the birds are moving way, way, way too fast. You can literally miss a swift if you blink sometimes. And so that's one of the reasons we need to have two or more people, so one person can rest after staring really, really hard at the general waterfall area. And so, yeah, go ahead. And then just really quickly, I can talk about this forever, but we want to get into more interesting stuff. And how do we score waterfalls and assess their qualities? So we have kind of general categories. And like, is it a segmented waterfall where it flows in parallel parts, or a tiered waterfall where it's kind of like a wedding cake thing where there's a run, a plunge, a run, a plunge. And then we also look at whether it's a plunge, horsetail, fan, or cascade. Let's not go into the specifics of that. And then we also look at the 6 different categories that swifts kind of seem to be queuing into and rate them from 1 to 5. So flow, and from 1 to 5, where 5 is we consider to be the best. It's just a lot of flow, because that usually creates like more moss around the outside of the waterfall, which is swifts like. And then we want to find waterfalls with commanding view, not small ones surrounded by trees. And we look at the number of their niches or nesting spots on the actual wall by the waterfall, and whether they're accessible to predators. Can a little short-tailed weasel or something like follow a ledge towards a potential nest spot? Swifts are really, really sensitive to it, and they always seem to know which area is a little too close to a ledge. We've never seen a swift nest right next to a ledge or right in a gradual part of the wall. We always like areas that are completely inaccessible. We want areas with no obstructions, no waterfalls with trees right in front of the waterfall, for the most part. There's always exceptions. And they seem to be seeking shade, and nesting sites with a lot of shade. And then also moss availability is a big one. And a lot of times that can kind of, even if the other categories are ranked really low, if there's a ton of moss, which we actually don't see a lot in the park, you see a lot more moss in northwestern Montana, but if there's a ton of moss, the swifts might be unhappy with the waterfall, even if the other categories get a really low score. And then just a couple of numbers, the lowest score from 2012 to 2022 of an occupied waterfall was 18. We pretty much know if a waterfall gets less than 18, it's very unlikely to have any nesting birds. And the highest score we've ever had was 28. And we've never had a waterfall that was perfect, that got a 30 if you add all of them together. In 2024, the lowest score for an occupied waterfall was 21, and the highest score was 26 out of 40. And so these are the waterfalls that we surveyed in this past year. We ended up surveying 33 different waterfalls, a total of 86 times. And 17, a little more than, I guess it is, yeah, a little more than half, were occupied, which is really nice. And we detected black swifts on 45 of the 86 surveys. And 2 waterfalls that have been occupied in the past were not occupied. I'll talk about one of them just a little more. So let's talk about the actual surveys. The first week was in northwest Montana, where elevations are a lot lower, and for the waterfalls we selected. And so it's a good place to start because you don't have to worry about access and snow. A park we couldn't really access until later in the year, and it was so hot. This is the first week of July, and the first 2 or 3 days we were there, the temperature during the day was 104, It's miserable. Most swift work is later in the evening, so that's nice. But we've surveyed these 4 waterfalls, and I'll tell you a little more about it. Okay. We started at the old Highway 2 falls. If you know where Kootenai Falls are on the Kootenai River, these are actually just up the hill, about 600 feet above Kootenai Falls. And they're very unique in that so old Highway 2 falls. I was surprised that there were birds there because the cedar trees everywhere, and they kind of block access to the waterfall. And so the swifts have to fly between the trees or come in from above, and we rarely see those types of waterfalls being occupied. So that was a surprise. And as you can see, this is a good spot for swifts. It's been surveyed a bunch of times since 2014, and each time we surveyed it, it was occupied. And the nest appeared to be around here, but there could have been another nest. And that's where we had most of the activities, right around this area. We never did see the actual nest cup in this one, just not good enough light, and we couldn't see it later the following day. Anyway, just 1 second. And we also see next to most of our waterfalls, we get to see western flycatchers. It's another waterfall species, or they really like that type of habitat. And so we saw a nice western flycatcher nest right next to the waterfall. This is the Sierran tree frog, formerly a Pacific tree frog. Now we know there's Sierran tree frogs, and John garden slugs there too. Ransom Falls, and one of my new favorites. All of these were new to me. I've surveyed a ton of waterfalls in Montana. All the ones in northwest Montana were new to me. This might be my favorite. Surveyed 8 times in 2015. It's occupied almost always. One of the reasons you'll see some of them are not occupied, some of the surveys, and a lot of that is because back in the day we did a lot of evening surveys when we were less likely to detect birds, even if they were present. Now that we're doing morning surveys, we tend to see a lot more swifts. And we found 2 occupied nests. I'll show you a picture in a second. So to hike to Ransom Falls, this is a crazy, crazy adventure. It's less than a fifth of a mile hike, which seems like, oh, that's going to be a piece of cake. But it's about 500 feet elevation gain. There's no trail. It's in a remote area, about 50 minutes north of Derby. And we got there late at night, and after we finished surveying Old Highway 2 Falls, and then we had to camp right there, little road pull off, and then just kind of go blind the following morning. You had the GPS coordinates, but we had to cross, this is Quartz Creek, which has vegetation about this high and super, super dense. When you get past the little creek section, there's about 30 feet of Devil's Club, which is no fun, really pretty, but no fun. And then we hit the hill that had sections that were more than 50-degree slope. So it took us about 35 minutes the first time to hike a fifth of a mile to the waterfall. But it was rewarding. Most waterfalls in Montana, like I said, the nests are too high. You can't get photos of the birds. You can't see them well when they're on the nest. And this place is a nice mossy talus at eye level from the nest, and we got some fantastic looks at nesting swifts. We found 2 different nests. This one, the previous one, are about 2.5 feet apart. We saw the incubating or brooding adults and their mates. Can you go back to the original picture of the waterfall? Yeah, this one. So the nests, both of them, are right around here. And it kind of looks like it would be accessible to predators, but it's really steep, and if it was accessible, swifts wouldn't be there year after year after year. Huge cedars in that area. And then on the drive back, after our evening survey, we got to about 3-4 miles up the road, driving towards camp. We had a mountain lion run right in front of us. Usually, if you're lucky enough to see them, they run right across the road. This one's kind of stopped, then started running down the road away from us, and we got to see it for about 10 seconds, which is a lot for a mountain lion. And we didn't crowd it, we gave it plenty of space, and after about 10 seconds, it veered off into the vegetation about a quarter mile from our camp. So, that night when you get ready for bed and go to the bathroom and all that, it's a little uneasy, same thing early in the morning when we got ready to go back to our survey stuff. But it was great, and you don't get to see a lot of it. This is a photo I took in Hart Mountain in Oregon a few years ago. And when we did Ransom Falls, that you just saw, our crewmates went to Turner Falls, which is pretty close to Yak. So way, way out there, really close to the Canadian border. This is a waterfall that has been surveyed a lot. One of the first one that was found in Montana. I think it's a fifth or sixth or seventh nesting site known in Montana. And it's been occupied 9 out of 9 times, so we know they really like this spot. And this is where we found the nest, right around there. And it's actually the same nest spot as one of the nests that were found the very first time the waterfall was surveyed. And the high count was 2 there, and we were lucky enough, not me, my crew, got to see a nice rubber boa, which is always a treat. They also surveyed, my crew surveyed the lower West Fork Yak Falls, which is about 10-15 miles north of Yak, right next to the Canadian border. It's not a very good waterfall, not very steep, just not good for swifts, so they didn't see any. And then the last one that we did that week is Lost Jack Falls. This is Hungry Horse Reservoir. Spotted bear is right here, if you're familiar with that area. This is way, way down there. So it's almost 3 hours from Hungry Horse to Lost Jack Falls. Not a very good waterfall. We selected it there about by chance, randomly, and so we had to survey it, but we kind of suspected we wouldn't get much there, and we didn't see any swifts there. Then in week 2, we got to go back to Glacier National Park, favorite place, where there's just gorgeous waterfalls, and we did all of the front country surveys. It was still earlier in the year, so we wanted to let the snow in the backcountry melt a little more, and we did 4 waterfalls, and then 1 more Running Eagle that we actually surveyed later. Go ahead. We started at Lunch Creek Falls, which is only about a mile away from Logan Pass. Pretty close to the road, but it's not the easiest hike, and there's a few spots that are a little steep. This is an interesting waterfall. It's really, really beautiful. We did our training there this year. We trained some of Lisa Bates' technicians. And what's interesting about this one is that in 2016, and when it was surveyed for the first time, there were 3 active nests, and I think 6 or 8 birds were observed. And every survey since then, we did not see a single swift. We're pretty good at finding swifts, and so it appears that they just stopped using this waterfall, even though it has fantastic nesting habitat, a lot of good nesting spots higher up, good flow, everything is there, and so we're not sure why they're not using that waterfall anymore. From there, we went to Haystack Falls, and we did a single survey there. We didn't have time to do the other 2 surveys. The site was occupied, so we had to survey it 3 times. So we did 1 survey, and then Diane Lundgren, that you all probably know, did the other volunteer to help us with the other 2. So that was a huge help. And this is one, like I said, you can see from the road, and Dan discovered this one in 2004. It's almost always occupied, and it's been surveyed a lot because it's so convenient. And I think the only 2 years it wasn't occupied were 2017 and 2018, when a rescue helicopter had to hover right in front of the nest because of an accident. And the adults abandoned the nest and did not come back the following year, so we were worried that they abandoned that location. But in 2019, they came back and they have been there ever since. This is a really crappy shot of the nest, which is right around here where the star is. And we also surveyed Sunrift Gorge, and a lot of you may be familiar with this. It's right on going to the Sun Road. Not even a waterfall. I mean, there's this tiny drop right there and right here. But one of the reasons we are a little interested in Sunrift Gorge is because in Colorado, there's a lot of swift habitat that is just like this, just little gorges with a ton of moss, not necessarily any seeps or flowing water, but the swifts seem to like them in Colorado. So we're kind of hoping maybe in Glacier they would use the same kind of habitat. And although we did have one bird, one survey, it appeared to only be a visitor. So a bird that was just visiting the waterfall and flying around like, "Ooh, what is this?" But not actually using the walls of the village. And we then surveyed Virginia Falls, that hopefully some of you are familiar with this one, and past St. Mary Falls, beautiful waterfall. And another one where we've never had any signs of occupancy, which is really strange because in Glacier, generally, if conditions are there, the swifts seem to be using them. And so I'm not sure why this waterfall is not occupied, but it could be a result of, like I mentioned at the very start, they have a strong nest site fidelity. So maybe it's not easy for them to occupy areas that have not been used before. And then a great spot to see dippers, like all of the waterfalls in the park. And then I always get excited when I see tailed frogs. And they're not easy to see. You usually see them when it's dark. And my wife studied tailed frogs for her master's in northern British Columbia. So whenever I see a frog with a little tail, which is an external cloaca actually, I get excited. Then the parks, the technicians, Eric Goddard and I think Sienna Substack, helped us a ton this season, and they surveyed Running Eagle Falls for us. As you can see, not great swift habitat. It's not very steep, and just about every part around here could be reached by not just a weasel, but a human could probably reach it. So the swifts weren't into this waterfall. And then on the third week, we took a little break from the park to let things thaw higher up in the backcountry in Glacier. And we did a bunch of random waterfalls around western Montana, two of them in the Sealy Swan, one on the Rocky Mountain front, close to Augusta, Benchmark Road, if you're familiar with that one. Crow Creek Falls are really cool waterfalls in the Elkhorn Mountains, close to Townsend. Palisade Falls are fairly well known by Bozeman. Sheep Creek Falls are next to Cook City. And so Holland Falls, you may know this spot. It's a great place to see swifts, especially if you're willing to hike in the dark and get to the spots when they're most active. But it's been occupied every single time we surveyed it. The nests are right here in this big crack. The swifts kind of come in and just swoop up right into this crack. And from the observation point, you can't really see the nest because they fly into it. And so after 6 surveys at Holland Falls, for the first time, they decided to walk across the super slippery boulders that are at the base of the falls and go all the way to the other side, climb up on a hill, and I finally got a photo, not a very good photo, but a photo of the nest, the adult in the nest over here. And there's the mate of this bird was perched pretty close to it, and probably around 10 o'clock at night. It was quite dark. And if you want to see swifts and beautiful waterfalls, I highly recommend Holland Falls. It's about a 45-minute hike along Holland Lake. Really, really cool. And we surveyed Morel Falls, which are also in the Sealy Swan, and didn't get any birds there. Right now, you can probably tell it doesn't look like a really great waterfall because it's low angle. There's a lot of ledges that go across the waterfall. So they didn't detect any birds there, except for a couple that just flew by, but obviously we're not using the waterfall famously. Then two of my younger technicians, including Braden Lucar, which some of you may know, we hired Braden for the season, and he helped us a ton. But they went to survey Whitewater Creek Falls off of Benchmark Road by Augusta. The first night, Braden hiked down to the waterfall, and all of a sudden he heard Gwen screaming, and he thought bear was attacking her or something, rushed back up the hill. Turns out, as she was getting ready to hike down to the waterfall, and she was doing something with her pack, her bear spray smacked against the boulder and basically exploded, but the entire thing emptied into her face. She told me it didn't go anywhere else. It wasn't spraying everywhere. It just hit her straight in the face, and she was completely covered, her face and her body and everything. And so he helped her, took her down to the creek. She had to wash her face and try to flush her eyes for more than 45 minutes. This is late in the evening. By the time she felt like she could do something, she was already almost hypothermic because she's in cold water. So we had to help her back into her tent, and then everything in the tent got covered with bear spray. That stuff is very oily. I don't know if you've ever seen it. Sleeping bag, all of her clothes, everything. So the following day, she was a trooper and was able to do the second survey the following day. Braden did the survey by himself that first night, obviously. But they weren't able to do another survey in the vicinity, about 3 or 4 miles away, because obviously they had to go to Helena, change clothes, address this issue. And so they skipped one waterfall and then continued after stopping Helena to Palisade Falls. By the way, Gwen told me that I'm not sure why, but for the rest of the season, she never washed the field pants, and so every time she wore them, she would get like little rashes, or like the skin would get irritated from the bear spray that was still on there. And Palisade Falls, Highlight Canyon, south of Bozeman, beautiful waterfall. Actually it gets a decent, okay score, and it has some possible nest niches where they could be nesting, nothing here. But there's never been black swift observed anywhere in that area. We've never seen a black swift in that part of Montana. If you look at eBird, just a big hole. And so we didn't expect to see them there, and sure enough, we didn't see them. You have to check, you never know, you might be surprised. And while they were doing this, my wife and Alexis, went down to Cook City and surveyed Sheep Creek Falls. Beautiful waterfall that's only about a quarter mile away from the road, but not a lot of people know about it because it's not marked and you can't see it from the road. And if you're ever in the Cook City area, I would highly recommend you check it out. There's actually a nice trail that takes you to the waterfall. Like I said, there's no swift in southern Montana, southwestern Montana, and we didn't see any swifts that day. But maybe I was empathizing or sympathizing with Gwen, because I think this may have been the same night when she had that problem. While we were hiking out from the waterfall, and after the survey, I stepped on a big boulder. The boulder started to roll. I went down with it. It ended up landing on my thumb and completely crushed my thumb to the point that I was confident that my thumb was broken. It looked like it went through a meat grinder. It was just terrible. Ended up not being broken, thankfully, but I did lose my nail, but that's okay. And that was my little field mishap this week. My boss, Christian Lenny, Soviet Crow Creek Falls, he lives in town. At the time, he lived in Townsend, so this was very close to his place. We've never seen swifts in Elkhorns, and this one was unoccupied. And then back to the park for our backcountry portion of the season. We started at Morningstar Falls, which is, if you're familiar with the Cut Bank Ranger Station, is right here. Browning is somewhere around here. It's St. Mary. This is a really cool part of the park that not a lot of people see. And you can get in there without paying, because there's no pay station there. Go ahead. This is me. This is where I had to check out, because in 2023, the very last Swift survey of the season, I had to carry a very heavy pack and with a pack raft up one of the steepest trails in the Cabinet Mountains, and I tore my meniscus. And my doctor told me that he didn't want me to carry a heavy pack into the backcountry glacier while they're giving me all sorts of injections and stuff. So I had to supervise from afar. I didn't get to do any of the backcountry surveys. So, to get to, it's about 6.5 mile hike from the ranger station to the Morningstar Lake campground, which is our base camp. And we survey 4 waterfalls in this area. It's about a 45-minute hike from the campground to the waterfalls, and you have to do it in the middle of the night. We usually start around 3:50 or 4 o'clock in the morning. We do a nice night hike to the waterfalls. If you survey at night, you get to do this during light, but then when you finish, you have to hike back in the dark, which is, we're always out in the dark in the park, and it gets you very comfortable with doing that kind of a thing. This is Morningstar Lake. Right around here, not pictured, is this massive, probably 1,500 or 2,000 foot cliff. It's a very, very beautiful spot, very peaceful. Seems like a very peaceful place. But last year, when Alexis and I and other crewmates and hiked in, we ran into a group of people, and the guy was carrying his pistol and a little chest holster, asked us, "Where are you going?" And we said, "We're going to Morningstar to do some surveys there." He said, "Well, we were just there, and you may want to reconsider, because we had a very, very aggressive moose, and we were just terrified the whole time we were there." And I thought, "Oh, that's not good. That's where we're going, and it's a moose where I've never had any issue." So I asked him a few more questions. Go back for something. And he said, yeah, he was terrorizing us during the night. He was menacing us. He was using all these colorful terms. He ended up sitting outside of his tent the entire night, awake, holding his pistol, because he was so scared that the moose was going to do something to them. And when I asked him a few more questions, like, is this really an issue? Is this guy just not used to camping in the backcountry? He said, yeah. And then the next day, I was walking around the lake, and I came face to face with this moose, and he had a satanic look in his face. And so that's why this is, I think this is how this guy perceived the moose. Something like this. When we got there, he saw the moose, and it didn't look as intimidating. He never bothered with us. The guy just didn't like the moose being around. People have different comfort levels in the backcountry. And this is Morningstar Falls. There's actually 2 different waterfalls here. This is number 1. This is number 2. We sorted them at the same time from the same observation point. Beautiful waterfall. Look at this nice flow. And go ahead. Another one from 2020. The previous one was 2020 as well. Nice flow. Number 1, number 2. One more. In 2020, we had 3 suspected nests here in number 2, and one here, here, and here, where the birds were coming in and out pretty regularly. Then 2023, the waterfall was completely dry, and we didn't get any swifts whatsoever. And same in 2024. 2024, there was a couple of little tiny drops. Basically, you see that the falls are black, so there's a tiny bit of moisture, but no flow. Both of those years, we didn't see any swifts there. This could change next year. We might have a nice wet winter and it might flow again. But the reason I'm talking about this is because it kind of seems like this is where we're heading in the park. As we know, a lot of the glaciers are getting smaller, the snowfields are getting smaller. And these birds, when they don't have the flowing water, they just, I mean, there's endless amount of terrain with nice little nooks and crannies, but they really need that regularly flowing water. And so it really makes me worried about swifts in Glacier Park. There's a couple of other waterfalls that seem like in the next 2 or 3 years they're going to be kind of drying up as well. And so we surveyed 4 different waterfalls in this area, and 3 and 4, and so 1 and 2, sorry, are right around here. They're pretty close together. It's about 45 minutes to get to this one, 55 minutes to get to this one. And we had some occupancy. 1 and 3 were occupied, so that was nice. And hopefully, you know, it's going to flow better in the future, and the swifts will come back. We'll see. Fingers crossed. Or just a few numbers. So yeah, Morningstar one is very reliable. 13 out of 14 visits. I'm sure all of the morning visits were occupied. Maybe we didn't see some at night. And yeah. And then we also surveyed at Flathead Falls, and by now you can probably tell these didn't have any swifts. When you stand at the bottom, you can pretty much touch the top. It's about 3 meters and change. But the guys from Colorado said you should, you know, it was one of the higher ranking ones, so you should really survey. You never know, maybe a swift will pop out of here or something. And we kind of did know, but we surveyed it anyway. We didn't get any birds there. Then on week 5, after a nice relaxing weekend, my crew went to Featherwoman Falls and Ellen Wilson Falls. Right here is Lake McDonald Lodge. You have to hike up Snyder and Sprague Creek up to Featherwoman Falls. It's about 3,500 feet elevation gain over 6.5 miles. So it's a hard hike. If you've been to the Sperry Chalet, these are the waterfalls you can see from Sperry Chalet up the mountain. And so it's a kind of a hard hike. That's the one hike that I was kind of happy to not have to do with my bad knee. All the other ones I really didn't want to do, but it didn't work out. From Featherwoman, we went up and over Lincoln Pass, right, which is about here, and then back down to Lake Ellen Wilson. So this is Featherwoman Falls, which is a beautiful fall complex, and the reason we don't consider these a bunch of multiple waterfalls, we just consider this a single waterfall, is because there's just a single flow or stream above that kind of branches, and it's not different streams. And go ahead. And this is a picture of Featherwoman Falls from 1915. I think Rita Saunders took this photo. He was a pretty well-known ornithologist in Montana at the time. But he had no idea that the swifts nested there, probably. And we surveyed this place a lot, and it's always occupied. 16 different surveys, and we had birds there every time. Sometimes we have a bunch of birds, like over 10. This year the high count was 3. These areas, one nest was right around here, so around here, another suspected nest around here. These circles is where we have activity of swifts going in and out. And it's about a 45-minute hike to get there, and then I climb up a really, really steep talus slope that's pretty sketchy. Also, in 2017 or 18, this is where my former supervisor, Amy Seaman, that some of you may know, she said this was the only time and in her swifting career that when she was watching the waterfall, she actually had to avert her gaze and not pay attention to potential swift movement because she saw something moving out of the corner of her eye, And when she looked, it was a wolverine running against the base of the waterfall, right along here. And she actually got some really nice photos of it too. So that was the only time she kind of let her guard down. For good reason. So Ellen Wilson, Lake Ellen Wilson, beautiful spot. Super fortunate to be doing swift surveys because they allow us to camp there for more than one night. Most people are restricted to one night, and they let us camp there for 2-3 nights. And it's such a beautiful spot. The campground is right on the lake down here. It's about 35-minute hike to Ellen Wilson number 2, which you can see is a really major waterfall. And then Ellen Wilson number 3 is more of a seat, and this is one where I kind of suspect and fear that we're not going to have, that we're going to lose the colony that's at number 3, because it seems like every year there's less and less water. So this is Ellen Wilson number 2, and for scale, here's my technicians right here in a little mountain boat right there next to them. They're not right at the base of the waterfall still. It's just the walls in Glacier Park are immense. I don't have to tell you that. Here's Ellen Wilson 2. You see there's some big ledges that go across here, but it's so big that the distance between ledges give the swift enough good terrain away from predators. Every year we have a nest right around this area, and then other suspected nests in other locations around the waterfall. And again, Ellen Wilson number 2 scored 25, which is really good. And we surveyed it 14 times. We've always had swifts there. It's usually a really good flow. And just another little side story, I'm probably running late, but the moment after this photo was taken, this was in 2020, I was telling that my crewmate, her name is Carmen, that so we wear helmets because there's a lot of rockfall in the park, potential rockfall. And I told her, I think here we should be pretty safe. I don't see a lot of fresh rocks that have just fallen. There's lichen on the boulders. It doesn't seem like a very active rockfall spot. Just clear. 2 minutes later, a rock the size of a softball crashes about 10 feet away from us. And I told her, don't listen to me. I don't know what I'm talking about. It was kind of a humbling experience, and always wear your helmet. And this is Ellen Wilson number 3. That's that other one that didn't have as much water on the aerial photo. And this always nests there. We've had 2 or 3 nests each year. And when it wasn't occupied, that was probably in those evening surveys that I mentioned when we don't get as many swifts. And you see way more than 2 birds. The high count was 2. Remember, we're only counting birds and obviously using the waterfall. These birds actually came in later in the day, later in the morning, right before we finished our survey, and they were hanging out to the wall in a spot that had a ton of moss and some slimy algae stuff. And I'm not sure if they were drinking or collecting the stuff to take it back to their nest, or we're not quite sure what they're doing. We call that a behavior of sliming. But they only came once, they did the thing, and they left. So we had no reason to suspect that they're actually breeding there, like the other 2 birds that were going in and out, in and out. Then on the way back, this is 2 weeks after Gwen had her bear spray incident. So if you have a bear spray incident, then why not have bear incident as well? She was hiking back down from, this is Featherwoman Falls, Sperry area. So she was hiking down, and this is Mount Brown right here with the hawk watcher. This the Snyder Lakes. She got to that junction at the where you cross the Snyder Creek, if you've been to that area. And as she was climbing back up from the creek, and she ran into a sow, and I don't remember if it was 2 or 3 cubs. This photo is not from that incident, but it's actually from that same area. And most of the time when we see grizzlies in the park, no problem. I've ran into so many of them on the trail. They're well trained, they know what to do, they walk around you reluctantly, or you walk around them, no problem. In this case, this sow was very aggressive. She did a bluff charge. She reared up. She was growling at her and clicking her jaw. And poor Gwen was just terrified. She had the bear spray out and ready. And after a face-off of about a minute or so, the sow finally kind of backed off, and Gwen was able to join another hiker and get away from there. And it was quite a traumatizing experience for her, from what I understand. And then this is the last week of surveys at Gunsight Basin, which is one of my favorite places in the park. I think it is my favorite place in Glacier National Park. This is not oriented correctly to the north, but Gunsight Lake is, you hike it from the Jackson Glacier Overlook. It's about a 6-mile hike. You get to a beautiful campground. And then in order to get to the basin in the back, where all the waterfalls are located, you have to hike about a mile and change. But that takes a good 2.5 to 3 hours, especially if you do it with a full pack. And in the past, the park didn't give us permission to camp in this spot. You can get undesignated camping permits in the park, but they can't be where your tent would be visible from a trail. They want you to be in places where nobody could see you if you get an undesignated permit. So we never got a permit to camp here, and because of that, we were only able to do evening surveys. Evening surveys, camped here, we hiked 2.5 hours to get here. Then when you finish, you get back to camp really late. You have to hike across this sketchy talus. It's really steep in some parts. But during that time, we just could not do morning surveys, because in order to get to the waterfall about half an hour, 45 minutes before sunrise, we'd have to leave at 2 or something like that. And it just wasn't feasible, wasn't safe. Last year, for the first time, we made a case for why it's important to stay there. We might see a lot more birds if we do morning surveys. We'll be sure to hide our tents in the willows or try to put them in spots where they're less conspicuous from the trail. And finally, they agreed. And so we got to do surveys at the Gunsight Basin and actually stay there for several nights, which was amazing. I was there, this is 2023, I wasn't actually surveying in 2024. So some of these are my photos and some are from the crew. Just a stunning location. There's no trees there, so we have to bring sacks, little sacks made out of Kevlar for the food. And then these little guys, the marmots, just love gnawing on these things. By the time we finish at Gunsight Basin, most of the food in the sacks is all mushed up, because whenever we're away at the waterfall, they just chew, little buggers. And so there we surveyed a whole bunch of waterfalls, because we had base camp right there, and everything was so convenient. We didn't have to hike 35, 40, 50 minutes to get to them. Everything was 4 or 5 minutes away. And so we surveyed Gunsight number 3 and 4, 2 Majestic. This is 4 right here. And, go back one time. This is one of my crew right here. It just gives you a little perspective of the massiveness of the place. And so number 3 and 4, you see 3 was occupied 4 of 9 times. Remember, we did a lot of evening surveys there where we're less likely to see birds. I'm pretty confident it's always been occupied. We just didn't see the birds. And same with number 4. And good high counts. And we didn't see any actual nests this year. Last year, for the next one. This one right here is one of my favorite swift nests that I've ever seen. It's actually pretty low on the wall. Can you go back to the previous one? It's right around here. It's still a good 100 feet up, but it's relatively low on the wall. And we would see these swifts just swooping in right into this thing, just going right in there. And we're pretty sure there's at least 2 nests there last year. I'm not sure why we didn't see any nests this year, or any activity in that spot. But the reason I like this one so much because it really reminds me. If you go back and forth a little bit, yeah, it looks like a swift's flying out into this. So it's kind of a fun one. And this is the view from your office when you do surveys in Gunsight Falls. This is number 3 and 4 that we just looked at. And number 2 is a little less exciting. It's occupied about half the time. This is one where we just entered the basin. You see this one, the crew from 2020. We did have just one bird there, so there should be one nest in that one. And Gunsight number 9 is a nice background waterfall for a tent. And you can see from both this photo and this photo, it's not a very steep waterfall. And so even though there's little sections that are probably steep enough for swifts, and maybe are even tall enough for swifts, and that basin is so amazing, and there's 10 other waterfalls that you can use. So why use the crappy one? So it was not occupied in any of the visits. And then this is number 5. I think this is the last one. We're getting there. And Gunsight number 5, 6, and 7, we surveyed from the same observation point, which is around here in this area. And so these guys are somewhere around here. And thankfully, we had enough technicians to be able to look at each one of those waterfalls. And all of them appear to be occupied. We had swift activity at all of them. And okay, so that was the last. Actually, I'm sorry. We had 2 surveys in the Bitterroots, and one in the lower part of the Bitterroots, kind of close to Stevensville, and the other one was South Lake Superior, in the Great Burn part of the Bitterroots. Not very nice waterfalls. We didn't get any swifts there. There are occupied waterfalls in the Bitterroots, but we didn't get to survey in 2024. We had fish, wildlife, and parks surveyed on as far as I know, but I'm not sure what the results are. And so we did 2 more waterfalls, and I'm not sure. What's next for black swift surveys? That's a good question. And so first, we're gonna get the Bird Conservancy of the Rockies that we partnered with. We have some really smart biometricians, and they're gonna do the analysis for us. And we're hoping to get some good occupancy and abundance data for Montana. Although this is just the first year, and we really need to sample, to survey a few more years to really be able to get some meaningful information. And we're waiting to hear on funding for 2025. There's a grant right now that we're really hoping to get, because without it, it's going to be a little rough. But we're hoping to do surveys in 2025 as well, and partner with Lisa and Central Park, and as usual. And we need trends. We know which waterfalls are occupied right now, but to me, anecdotally, it seems like a lot of the sites have less birds over time. And so it's important to keep an eye on this really rare and elusive species that could be facing some really serious problems in the near future. So finger crossed for us and for the swifts, for us to be able to do some more surveys, and of course, fingers crossed for the swifts. And I'd like to thank Lisa and Glacier National Park that have supported us so much from the start in this project. Any of the black swift survey years would not have been possible without the ton of support from Lisa and her crew, and Montana technicians, Montana Audubon technicians, Peter Dudley, Braden, William, Christian Lenny is my supervisor, but during the summer he was my technician. And then volunteers, Diane Lundgren, that helped us a lot at the haystack, and then Alexis, my wife, and then Patria, she's Christian, my supervisor, partner, and they helped a ton. And then also the Cross Charitable Foundation, they gave us a nice generous grant to do some of this work. And I'm sure I'm forgetting somebody, but and that's about it. And this little nestling is again in Shadow Falls in Idaho, where you can really get fantastic looks at the black swifts. And that's it. Any black swift?
Yeah, do you use night vision goggles?
No, we were actually offered some night vision goggles. It has been tried, not in Montana, but in Colorado. They experimented with that. It wasn't as fruitful as you'd expect. They move so fast, and with the night vision, a lot of times it doesn't quite catch him, or you're not sure it was a swift that you saw. We had a guy, he may even be here, I'm not sure, I don't know who it was, that offered us some night vision equipment, and that was taken from the bottom of a helicopter, like a police helicopter. And he said, it's an amazing camera, and you're welcome to use it. I don't remember if you wanted to donate it or let us use it. He said, that's incredible. We should try that. Said, yeah, it's about 45 pounds. Maybe not. So it's something that's in the future. It could be something we experiment with, and I could see it being useful. But so far, people that have tried it, they didn't get way better or different results than just people. Oh, I'm sorry. Anything else? Well, thank you all for coming. It's always fun for me to talk about swifts, and thanks for listening.